Hello and welcome to a top grade analysis of Tybalt. Capulet says, when Tybalt is dead, well, we were born to die. And Shakespeare treats him in the same way. He's created Tybalt purely in order to kill him off. Tybalt is probably the only irredeemable character in the play. And the reason Shakespeare does that is because he embodies a particular kind of masculinity which the play and Shakespeare argues against. Shakespeare uses Tybalt's sexism to show what's wrong with masculine society, the patriarchal society. So he begins with this insult towards Benvolio: "What art thou drawn amongst these heartless hinds?" Now a hind is a female deer, so he is insulting the men by saying that they just like females. However, the underlying insult is that women are heartless. They're not even worthy of respect or being treated as human. Shakespeare also presents us immediately with his vanity and hubris. Tybalt feels himself invincible as a duelist, and he's telling Benvolio quite simply that he's so skillful he's going to kill him. Of course, at the end of this scene, nothing happens. He doesn't even cut Benvolio, and this foreshadows what a useless duelist he'll be, so that Romeo is able to kill him very quickly at the end. So Tybalt's vanity is coupled by a total lack of self-knowledge. Tragic heroes also need to aim their hubris at God. They have to challenge God's authority for the tragic ending to fit them. So here he says, "What drawn and talk of peace? I hate the word." Well, that of course goes against all his Christian teaching. He tries to redeem that by saying, "as I hate hell," but he puts hell on a par with the Montagues and Benvolio, which of course completely undermines the medieval and Tudor vision of what hell was. The ultimate punishment God gives us for all our sins. Nothing can ever be as bad as that. So actually, Tybalt diminishes hell in his challenge to Benvolio and effectively challenges his own Christian society. Shakespeare is pointing out that this level of violence in society, where young men are armed and able to duel with each other almost at will, is in fact evil. And that's why it's the duels that lead to the eventual tragedy. A top-grade structural feature here is hate hell. This is a double syllable emphasized. It's called a spondee. It breaks the iambic pentameter. We're no longer going from unstressed to stressed syllables. And by breaking the iambic pentameter, Shakespeare is showing that Tybalt is wrong, just as his meter is wrong. It's a subtle point that will get you top grades. In this quotation, Shakespeare is even more explicit about Tybalt's hubris. So this is spoken as a soliloquy, which means they are the character's real thoughts. They're not delivered with another audience in mind. So he is genuinely saying that he thinks it is not a sin to kill Romeo. Of course that is. That is an immediate challenge to God. But Shakespeare is taking a wider aim, because Tybalt represents this male honour in society. Tybalt is obsessed with honour and the honour of his family, and therefore he feels justified in killing. And Shakespeare is therefore attacking this patriarchal view of honour as being the be-all and end-all, sufficient justification to kill somebody. Shakespeare also shows us how this idea of family honour is actually nothing of the sort. It's just a convenient lie that Tybalt and other young men like him, or even older men, use in order to justify male aggression and violence. After all, he's saying now to Capulet at his own ball that he is not going to endure Romeo and he's going to kick him out or kill him. This, of course, is a complete challenge to Capulet, the patriarch of the family. If Tybalt really did believe in family honour, he would never dare stand up to Capulet in this way. But instead, it's his own vanity and hubris that makes him think he's entitled to do this. In this quotation, Shakespeare again breaks the iambic pentameter in order to show how wrong Mercutio is. So he starts with the trochee, where patience and perforce puts the stress on the first and third syllables. And then the second line, makes my flesh tremble, we could argue is definitely another spondy. Two stresses together. Or depending on how you want the actors to say it, it may be trochaic, makes my flesh. This is another soliloquy, so therefore these are Tybalt's genuine thoughts, and they are presented in rhyming couplets. Now, Shakespeare does this in the play for two reasons mainly. One, where the character is revealing some wisdom, well, we can rule that out straight away, or when we're reaching an ending. So here, he's imagining the ending that will come to Romeo, but Shakespeare is pointing out this decision leads to his own death. And this is typical of the tragic characters in the play. In a Greek tragedy, characters do everything they can to avoid their tragic fate. But in Romeo and Juliet, all the characters spurn fate and rush towards it. They do nothing to avoid their fate at all. Tybalt is putting on a front, appearing to be sweet, but is going to convert to bitter gall. Gall is produced in the gallbladder and is poisonous, and so Shakespeare is dramatising what a poisonous influence Tybalt's masculinity is, and therefore what patriarchal masculinity is like, poisoning society. This brings us interestingly towards Tybalt's homophobia. So interestingly, there was no word for homosexuality in Shakespeare's day. Love between two men was accepted as long as, once the men were married, they only indulged in heterosexual sex. Tybalt, however, uses it as an insult towards Mercutio when he says, Mercutio, thou consortest with Romeo. What he's hinting at is that they are male lovers. Mercutio, of course, is outraged at this suggestion because, as I explain in the guide, Mercutio is in love with Romeo and has passionate feelings for him. And Mercutio is enraged because Romeo doesn't return this. His love is unrequited. So Shakespeare uses Tybalt's homophobia against him. When Tybalt talks of his love for Romeo, he means this in the gentlemanly way. The convention was you were exceptionally polite to other gentlemen in society because if they thought you were insulting them, they would challenge you to a duel. You risked being killed. So he begins with this exaggerated politeness, but then says, thou art a villain. That's the love I'm giving you. Now, in the modern day, this insult would have very little power. But in this patriarchal society, class and reputation are everything. A villain is a person of low birth with poor manners. So this is a much greater insult to Romeo than implying that he's Mercutio's lover. This level of disrespect demands that Romeo tries to establish his respect by duelling with Tybalt. But the plan backfires because of Tybalt's homophobia. Romeo says, look, there's a reason that I've got to love thee, which makes total sense to Romeo because he's married Juliet, Tybalt's cousin. But it makes no sense at all to Tybalt. It can only mean that Romeo is saying he fancies Tybalt. Tybalt thinks he's being mocked. There he was accusing Mercutio and Romeo of having a homosexual relationship, and now Romeo is saying, actually, Tybalt, I rather like you. And this will help explain his rage that will help him cheat in the duel. So it's vitally important to remember that Tybalt cannot kill Mercutio in an unfair fight. That will mean a dishonourable duel. Tybalt will have no reputation. He is only able to kill Mercutio when Romeo intervenes and Mercutio cannot see what Tybalt's doing. So Shakespeare shows that all his etiquette and manners and politeness were all a sham, a pose. And worse than that, they were self-deception. Tybalt hasn't realised what a poser he is. He hasn't realised that he's just in love with this image of violence and that there isn't actually any substance to him. And it's this vanity and hubris that gets him killed. But remember, Shakespeare's wider point is what Tybalt represents. He represents this youthful male perspective that glorifies violence, that is homophobic, that is sexist, which is why Shakespeare punishes it by killing him off. And this is why Shakespeare gives Tybalt these final words. We can tell Shakespeare's viewpoint because Tybalt is not given a rhyming couplet to end his life and the scene. Instead, he is cut off short by Romeo, who actually steals his last line, saying this shall determine that. Romeo breaks the iambic pentameter just like he's going to break Tybalt. And by killing him at this point, Shakespeare is pointing out that his obsession over status and his homophobic attitude are what makes him worthy of death, as well as his hubris and challenge towards God. So if you want to guarantee a top grade, you might consider buying the guide, but otherwise you might want for free the videos appearing here, or is it here?